Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Christabel Phiri from the Southern Africa Trust, who will be facilitating this discussion, which is looking at the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on small-scale cross-border trade. As you all know that most African countries have closed their borders to contain the spread of the virus. And this has really affected citizens who are engaging in small scale cross-border trade. This trade is really a significant feature of our regional as well as continental trade, in that it helps us to actually generate substantial amounts of income, but has also created employment for millions of people within our region. Furthermore, we also know that small-scale cross-border trade is also enabling vulnerable populations to access goods and services that is also contributing to poverty alleviation, food security, as well as household livelihoods. So I am very excited and happy to introduce a great panel that will help us to unpack this issue. So we are joined in this panel by Dr. Talkmore Chidede from the Trade Law Center based in Cape Town. We are also joined by Regina Kanyimbiri, who is from the Malawi Cross-Border Traders Association. We also have from the Southern Africa Cross-Border Traders Association, the Zambian chapter, we have Mr. Jacob Makambwe, and we will also be joined in with Mr. Augustine Towanda from the Zimbabwe Cross-Border Traders Association, also representing the Southern Africa Cross-Border Traders Association. So welcome to everybody, and we look forward to engaging with you. We have a chat service that you're able to send questions. You can send them to our an email, comms@southernafricatrust.org, and we will be able to share those questions with all the participants that are part of this discussion and be able to engage with you. So in order to kickstart this discussion, so we're going to start with Talkmore, just to share with us and provide a brief overview in terms of what has been the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on African trade. Talkmore, we know that trade is essential for economic growth and poverty reduction. Can you just share with us in like 10 minutes what has been the impacts of this pandemic on African trade?
Thank you very much, Christabel. Good afternoon to your audience. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak on this panel. And it is a great honor and privilege to be part of this esteemed panel of cross-border trade experts in Africa. At this very moment, I would like to say it out the pandemic on African trade of data across the continent. But we cannot deny the fact that the pandemic has severely disrupted the continent's deep integration agenda and prospects of the pandemic on many occasions across the continent. For example, we have seen be launched on the now January 2021. I would like to say that the direct and visible effects of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic on the African trade most of it manifests from the COVID-19 policy responses or measures that have been adopted and implemented by governments at a national and regional levels. They've adopted these measures and policy responses in order to contain the virus, stop the spread of the virus, to protect lives and livelihoods, and also for food security reasons. Despite these measures being adopted for legitimate and compelling reasons, we have seen that these policies have, on the other side, negatively affected the exports and imports of goods and services across the border in Africa and beyond. And it has affected both, it has affected formal and most significantly, the informal cross-border traders. These these measures, they include, as you mentioned, Christabel, earlier in your introduction, restrictive lockdowns, business travels, except for essential services. And we see that some of the trade-related that few months, COVID-19 in these past few months, they include the oil sector, which was hardly hit by the low demand, and which was hardly hit by low demand and price of oil across the globe. We've also seen that tourism, sea, air, and road transport, they've also been affected severely by the pandemic, including also the freight forwarding and logistics, also on retail and other critical services that are crucial for the movement of goods within and across the borders. We have seen also a massive loss of employment, income, lives, and increased poverty across the continent. And the issue of food security has become a pressing issue. We've seen so many countries that are relying that are reliant on food imports. They've been affected by this virus. And we see that mass production of goods has been affected due to the lockdown, as most of the countries adopted lockdown regulations whereby commercial activities were suspended. And we also see some of the measures that have been adopted, including the border closures and other operational measures that have been adopted at the borders by most of the countries. Some countries have closed all borders to goods and services. Most of the Southern African countries, they've closed their borders to passengers. And this is directly and have had a huge blow on informal cross-border traders. Some of the borders are open to cargoes or essential services only. And we've seen that we have numerous reports or problems that have arisen due to the adoption or implementation of these border measures, policy measures, and operational measures at the borders with regards to how trade is being conducted, how goods are moving across and within the borders. We've seen that some of the borders are operating at a limited capacity. Some of the ships, cargoes, truck drivers are also subjected to extensive health screenings, and sometimes they are subjected to quarantine time, and they are also drivers are also subjected to compulsory borders. And
Talkmore, we're not able to hear clearly.
It's taking between 3 to 6.
Okay. I think the line just got cut off. Talkmore, are you still with us? So I think we've, from what Talkmore has been able to share, he's been able to give really a broader picture in terms of what has been the impact of the pandemic on African trade. And I think he's highlighted a number of issues and key things that we'll pick up in the second part of the conversation. Talkmore, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. Yeah, you got cut off. So are you able to wrap up in the next 2 minutes? Then we move to the next speaker. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have also seen the export restrictions, SACU countries. We've also seen that Zimbabwe has banned the export of medical supplies. We see even import restrictions being imposed by most countries. And supplies. We've seen Botswana has banned the imports. We've also seen Kenya and Uganda banning the imports of second-hand clothing, which is one of the measures that they say it stops the spread of the coronavirus. But there's also good news for other traders who are trading in the medical supplies and the customs duties on medical supplies, and this has been VAT on medical or food imports that are crucial during this pandemic. This has happened in Zimbabwe, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. And at the regional level as well, we've seen some of the regions have adopted cooperation or coordination mechanism to ensure that trade is not disrupted during this pandemic. For example, SADC has adopted guideline for transport. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talkmore. Thank you so much. So we're going to just pick up from where you have left it in terms of what have been the issues now at a country level. What has been the impact of the pandemic on small-scale cross-border trade? So we'll move on to Regina. And I would like you to share, we know that women are the most dominant in cross-border trade. How has the pandemic affected women cross-border traders with your experience in Malawi? And really share over and above this pandemic, what have been the challenges of women cross-border traders? Regina, are you still here with us? Maybe while we're waiting for Regina to reconnect, Jacob, are you able to share from Zambia what has been happening to the cross-border traders?
Okay, thank you very much, Christabel, for giving me this opportunity that we must share what is happening around here. Okay, to start with, the pandemic itself has had a lot of impact, especially for women cross-border traders. And you know that Zambia being at a central point, you'll see that we have countries like Zimbabwe on the other side and Malawi, and also DRC, where most of the small-scale traders are actually, conducting businesses around different type of goods and services that they actually take in these particular countries. And now Zambia is totally closed in terms of passenger moving to one point to the other, especially now. I think the last one was the Nakonde-Tunduma border, which actually was closed recently. Yeah, so we see that there's been a slow down in terms of cross-border trade, especially for small-scale traders, women that have been trading around the Comesa market in some certain areas in the border areas where they are no longer crossing to go to other countries to conduct business on a daily basis. What has been also most of the challenges, you find that these small-scale traders have got limited capital. And this particular pandemic has actually brought a lot of pressure in terms of, for them to try and access protective, equipment, especially the masks and the, other relevant, things they need to protect themselves, like the sanitizers in the areas where they are. And moreover, when you talk about Zambia has not experienced a total lockdown. This has also given a bit of a leverage for small-scale traders to change the type of business they're doing. Other than crossing the borders, they were trying to look around where they can actually continue to trade within themselves, within the localities where they are. So we have actually also seen what actually happened 3 days ago at the DRC, the border between Zambia and the DRC, where in that particular country and Zambia had restricted passenger movements and the total lockdown of trade between DRC on the Kasumbalesa, apart from the cargo that is coming from other countries, like going to transit. But we saw the rebellion that most of the Congolese couldn't hold until they had to overcome the security and they forced themselves to come into Zambia. This actually shows how impact this particular COVID has on cross-border trade, because DRC and the people that are staying closer to borders with Zambia on the DRC really depend on Zambia to supply, commodities that are also coming from the other part of Southern Africa. We have actually seen that also government is trying to put in measures to try and see if they can bail out SMEs, but we don't know if this is actually going to have focus also on small-scale traders. And again, because the issues of the financial institutions where they're able to put, issues to do with collateral has been a challenge for most of small-scale traders, to have access to such type of facility. Zambian government has put a 10 billion Zambian kwacha. We hope, and we're trying to advocate, that we are able to, advocate that small-scale traders also should have, a facility so that they can access this particular, bailout, either at the moment or even in the post-COVID era.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing those highlights. Regina, are you able to hear me? Regina? Regina, are you able to hear me? Letu, are you able to check whether she's on mute or check her connection?
She has no sound.
She has no sound. Okay, so I just wanted to check if Augustine Towanda was able to connect.
He's not here, Christabel.
Okay. So I think we'll just continue. Maybe we go back to Talkmore, just for you to just share what interventions need to be made. I think from Jacob's presentation and what is shared, what is happening in Zambia, already there are some key issues that are already coming out, which need to be addressed in terms of helping cross-border traders. But in terms of your experience, and I know that Tralak has done a lot of papers in trying to really track what has been the impact of the pandemic, what needs to be done and what kind of support should be given to cross-border trade in light of trade facilitation as we try to embark on having safe trade. What should we do? What needs to be done? And what should be the response from government?
Okay, thanks very much. Considering that, as you have mentioned, that cross-border trade is very important for employment, is very important for household income generation, food security, and the like. I think it is important for governments to act swiftly and wisely in this time to ensure that cross-border trade does not continue to be interrupted by the pandemic. And there are a lot of interventions that the governments can do, and the governments can help and support cross-border trade to ensure that it's not disrupted. Picking up from what Jacob has said, one of the things that I would think of is the issue of finance, access to inclusive finance and other non-financial government support. And also to ensure that trade facilitation measures adopted more than trade restriction measures, as we have seen, as I have highlighted in my introduction, saying that most of the police responses are more restrictive than facilitating trade. So we need to ensure that governments ensure that whatever policies or responses they are adopting to fight the pandemic, it does not affect the flow of goods, the flow of trade or the movement of goods across the borders. And I think the other thing as well, we have seen, I think this has brought to our attention or highlighted some of the significant things or policy intervention that needs to be considered. For example, adopting simplified trade regimes like what the COMESA has done to allow and to bring on board small traders such that they are able to trade. Because right now, as we have seen, that only mass production or mass cargo is allowed to move across the borders. So small scale traders are treated as passengers. They are not allowed, they cannot trade across the borders because they do not qualify to be borders. And the other thing that I can think of is to entrench, from a policy perspective, to entrench some of these commitments in legally binding instruments. Because I understand cooperation is very important, as what other governments have done or regional governments has done. It's important, but we need to take a step further by entrenching these commitments into legally binding instruments. And this enhances a rules-based trade governance. Most of these regional organizations, they do not have supranational powers to enforce cooperation mechanisms. So if some of these commitments are entrenched into legal instruments, it's easier to enforce them and bind governments when they have committed. And we also need to, I think forward and ahead in terms of how we should do our businesses, digitize and move to e-commerce and electronic certificates, or do things electronically rather than doing things manually all the time at the border. Because some of the things that you need to consider at this moment is the goods that are being traded so far are essential, and they need to reach their destination as soon as possible. And if we continue doing some of the manual things, we are continuing delaying the reach of these products to their final destination. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I just want to try one more time if we're able to hear Regina. Are you able to connect Regina now? I think she's having a sound problem. I've just checked that Augustine Towanda has joined us. And I just wanted to check if he is connected. Letu? Mm-hmm. Augustine Towanda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but
great. Great. So I would just like you to just share briefly in terms of what is happening in Zimbabwe and what has been the impact of the pandemic on cross-border traders in Zimbabwe, and also just to highlight what the Southern Africa Cross-Border Traders Association is doing to really profile this issue that is affecting the traders in the region. Augustine?
Of the discussions with government and other stakeholders. And we have been asked to prepare a post-COVID document, which we have just submitted to our parent ministry, and it covers quite a number of areas. I'm not going to just some measures can be done, but briefly, we split our issues into social and enterprise-related efforts. And the enterprise-related efforts is what we sort of concentrated on in our presentation to the government. At a regional level, we have developed a concept which we have circulated through our JSC, was developed I think I'm lost.
Hi, Augustine, can you try and repeat what you're saying, because the connection was not very great?
At national level, we have been engaging with government. Are we together so far?
Yes, yes, yes.
And we have been requested to present a document on post-recovery of our sector. We presented that document today, and obviously we will be following that document up. Are we together so far? Because I think network is really headache.
Yes, 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 we're together.
In the document, we focused more on the enterprise side of recovery. The government is definitely, on its own volition, is doing something on the social front to give out some kind of handouts. Our document was sort of focusing on the short-term intervention, focusing on the social needs. So we've presented a document which looks at how we can resuscitate the livelihoods of the enterprise of the cross-border traders and social inclusion officer, a concept which we have shared with our friends, which we aim to pitch interventions at a regional level, as well as guide our affiliates as they engage on this discourse. We have got that document, and which we hope will be able to be used in terms of resource mobilization, as well as coordinate regional efforts of the subsector of cross-border.
Sorry, the sound is not great, Augustine, we can't hear you.
I think we'll Augustine, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so we lost you for a bit. And if you could just repeat what you said in the last 1 minute, because I think you were raising some very important issues in terms of what you're proposing to help cross-border traders.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Basically, the thrust of our proposal anchors basically on 3 areas. The number 1 challenge, according to our own assessment, is obviously COVID will restrict movement of persons. Therefore, it requires a review of the methodologies of marketing and transportation. Are we together so far?
Yes, yes.
The second area and challenge which our intervention seeks to address speaks to the informality of cross-border trading. Because of its informality, in order now to cater for traders, even on a humanitarian basis or at micro enterprise level, you need to have a strong database. This is the only way you would then be able to cover everybody. So movement building, collection of data of all these needs to be addressed. The third and last point in our thrust is the lockdowns have decimated the capital base of cross-border traders. Are we together there?
Yes.
Because the lockdowns have decimated the capital base, there is need to obviously provide strategies that increase access to capital. And to us, the easiest way is having revolving funds targeting recovery. Those are basically the 3 key challenges that we identified, and we do have strategies around those 3 as a way of mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic. Are we together?
Yes, we are together. Thank you so much for giving those highlights, and just concrete steps in terms of what can be done to actually support cross-border traders. I wanted to really try and get Regina to join us because I think we would have benefited from her insights as well from Malawi. And I was trying to connect her through WhatsApp, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to hear. Regina, hello?
Okay.
Yeah. Hi. Are you able to share? I just want to check with Letu whether you can hear Regina through this connection.
Yeah, I'm able to hear you now. Thank you so much.
Okay. And so are you able to share briefly in terms of what has been happening in Malawi?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity in the first place. With this COVID-19 pandemic, a lot has happened to women traders here in Malawi. We have got so huge challenges that our businesses are collapsing. The first major challenge is about transportation. Due to the policies that the government has put in place when traveling, reducing the number of people in a car or minibuses, the transport cost has gone up so much that for a cross-border trader to travel, to collect goods from one point to another, it has become a nightmare. That's the first major huge challenge that the cross-border traders face in Malawi. The other thing is about the closure of the borders. As a cross-border, you normally rely on borders to go to and from when purchasing our goods. So with the closure of borders, the business have closed down. Even the suppliers, they have closed their doors. The off-takers as well, they are coming in minimum sizes. So the businesses are very much collapsing. As a result, most of the women trade cross borders have resorted into informal business trading, doing the business that they were not doing before. So they are consuming their capital. Instead of making profits, the capital is dwindling. We have got this thing about the banks and the microloan finances. We thank them because they gave us the leeway not to pay the debts now until this COVID pandemic is over. But now you can look at the scenario. Here I am, I'm not able to do any business because I cannot cross to Tanzania or to Zambia. So instead of multiplying that the money I have, the capital, instead of multiplying and using the profit, I'm now using the capital I have. Even if the banks now decide to put back their money, I have nothing to pay them back. That's some of the challenges that women cross-border traders are facing in Malawi.
Thank you so much. And can you just briefly share with us, like, what would you want government to do, and what kind of assistance would you need? What do you need immediately now?
The kind of
Sorry, Christabel, please can you put her sound a bit closer? It's not too clear.
With a funding, so that we may be able to do other types of businesses, knowing that we are venturing into a new scenario altogether. So if there's a chance that, like funds, because the most huge problem is funds. In business, normally we talk about capital. So if you don't have a capital, there's no business. 90% of the women, their capitals has gone off. They have consumed it all, they have nothing to begin on. So if the association can be helped with a funding so that the women could at least have something to start their business.
Great. Thank you so much. So we'll go back to, there are a couple of questions that have come through which are targeting different areas around priorities for women traders, as well as what kind of stimulus packages can be put in place to support cross-border traders. I want to go back to Jacob and just give us some quick brief highlights in terms of what do you think needs to be done at a national level, immediate interventions post when the borders are open, what kind of support should be given to cross-border traders, but also for the associations. I think Regina has highlighted a number of things. So there are issues around financing, but there's also issues around personal protection, even as the women start going to the borders. Maybe there's need for like coordination among women traders, whereby they can all come together and say, this is what we need, and not everyone has to travel. What kind of interventions should be done at a national level? So Jacob, can you just share?
Okay, thank you very much, Christabel, for that question. I think for Zambia, we have actually seen some responses from government in trying to put up some kind of a fund that can actually be accessed by all SMEs across the country. But as I've actually seen a question from Masego, where she's trying to say that these type of facilities do not have a specific focus to address the issues to do with informal cross-border traders. And what we have actually done as a national association is actually to formulate some kind of a coalition with different type of organizations where we are able to lobby government so that we can actually be given a specific, amount that can actually go to specific type of businesses, just like cross-border trade. You talked about the post-era after maybe the COVID has actually ended. When we continue to see the numbers of COVID rising, I don't see that anytime soon borders can actually open, but we need to look at certain, or different ways of trying to, encourage cross-border trade, to actually take place. And one of the issues that we need to promote is to have access to affordable technology, so that even small-scale traders are able to afford, whether they will be able to order their products online. And then this actually comes with the issues to do with security, on where they're actually going to be maybe remitting their resources to order these particular products to come. Because we have actually seen that cargo is still coming and can actually go to cross the borders. So we are actually looking at if collectively cross-border traders, especially women, if they were to come together, they would actually, have some kind of a list of goods that they would actually want, and they would actually send to different manufacturers so that they are able to order in one, so that they can ship that particular, consignment to a country where they could actually come and share when it actually arrives. But now this calls that cross-border traders ought to be more formal in the way they're actually doing their businesses. So the issues of informality are the ones that have always hindered the cross-border traders, to have access to, these resources. So the other thing is, in order for women to look at alternatives in terms of getting their products, we are trying also to encourage the government to look at, to reduce the cost of production, so that private sector can also try to start manufacturing certain goods that can actually be traded within the country. And cross-border traders, at the moment when the borders are still closed, they can have alternatives where they can actually buy these particular products, so that they can actually keep their businesses afloat as they are waiting, for this particular COVID to actually go down, eventually get back to normal. But also the other thing is, there's very little value addition at national levels in terms of trying to look at alternatives in terms of goods. And I think this is what has brought a lot of competition, where certain goods and products are well taken from other countries that have got standards, and they are able to, get the market even in the country that is even producing similar products. So within the country here, we are also trying to work with the government in trying to put up some kind of a risk health reporting, systems. Because what is also lacking here is that most of the cross-border traders that do not have access to any digital platform have got a challenge in terms of accessing information. Probably Lusaka is the epicenter of the pandemic, and now we are seeing, this connecting to other towns, Kanyimbiri, Copperbelt now in Ndola. So we are seeing that eventually, even in northern parts where Nakonde is, there's been a lot of cases now that have actually been identified in that particular course. So there's actually need to come up with a proper platform. And again, we are working with the several organizations that are also involved in trade, so that we can actually bargain that that particular 10 billion that has been put by the government can also focus on the informal cross-border traders. And we have developed a paper so far that we are about to submit to government in the coming week, so that we can actually see and sit down with the government to see if a certain percentage of that particular amount of money can actually target those that were doing cross-border traders. Or after the COVID-19, a certain similar package can actually be targeting at informal cross-border trade. Now, the issues of the non-tariff barriers, now, there are so many issues now that we can talk about and that we can link. As Talkmore was talking about the issues of more restrictive than facilitation. We want to see governments to be more facilitating than to restrict. Because it's not only COVID-19 that we've been talking about, and I think Ebola has also been a challenge for Zambia and most countries that have been trading with countries like DRC that are exposed to another type of virus like Ebola. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. Maybe I can just bring in Talkmore here. I think you've raised a very key issue, Jacob, when you talk about manufacturing inside the countries. And Talkmore, from the research that you have been doing, are you seeing countries moving to the import substitution strategy where they start producing from inside locally and diversifying in terms of the products that they need to produce, which would help some of the countries become more competitive. Do you think that is going to help in the long term and make products even cheaper and also create new opportunities for cross-border traders to engage in?
Chris, picked up so far from what the government, especially the government of South Africa, is doing when it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Learning something which is to rescue businesses. I think it's something that is important so far, and most of the governments need to learn and focus, especially on developing their trade policy or industrial policies, on focusing mostly on some of the products that, because what we have picked up currently is we have seen that with the export restrictions and import bans, we have seen that most of the countries actually rely on imports on most of the essential products, including food products, which is crucial for food security. And it's one of the things that when we are moving forward and post-COVID-19, we should try to reconfigure and consider our industrial policies and industrial development issues to make sure that we are producing enough to feed the country and enough to even export to other markets, rather than relying on the critical and essential products that we need to live on a daily basis, to rely on imports. We have to produce locally and sufficiently before we start exporting.
Great. Great. Thank you so much for that, Talkmore. And maybe lastly, bringing in Augustine Towanda, can you just share from Sabita? There was a question from one of my colleagues, Marlon, wanting to know that what is the position for Southern Africa Cross-Border Traders Association on issues of cash transfers? Is it something that needs to be considered in terms of helping cross-border traders? But also, I also wanted to find out from the association, the regional association itself, how are you preparing yourselves to be responsive to traders in light of the fact that you can't engage with cross-border traders? You know, what mechanisms are you putting in place in engaging cross-border traders, sharing information on the coronavirus, how they should protect themselves even when the borders are open? What do you think from the association perspective, what needs to be done, and what kind of support do you need as an association to help you to become more responsive to cross-border traders?
Thank you, Christabel. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Firstly, I would like to echo the contributions and we are going to be doing business. We really have got to find methods of assisting the trader in terms of IT compatibility, like Jacob was talking about. But what I would like to flag out is with education levels among women, that the gender gap will sort of increase in that area. It's something that I think we need also to flag out. But the issue of diversification, which was talked about, we definitely need to assist members to start looking at other value chains. This has already been mentioned. So this is definitely an area where we would need to work. Then in terms of transportation, we have people like your Malaysians who have been doing some job. I think right now, there is now need for connectivity between those kind of service providers and associations in terms of having more of goods moved across countries and less of persons.
Mm-hmm.
Less contact. The area of informality, this is a major area which at regional levels like BITA can play, because in order to assist all the traders, because of the informality, no government has correct information of how, what quantum, what sizes. At this level, SAGBITA can actually help by just the traders. As a way, it will also help even the planners to see who has been relying on this kind of livelihood. With that kind of data, we will then be able to start planning even at national level. Remember, we to now begin to assess the actual constituents at regional level, and this is where
Hi, Augustine.
Cash. Yes.
Yes, you can continue. You can finalize. Mm-hmm.
Right. On the cost context of capital reinjection into micro enterprise, there is need for governments and the development agencies to come back to base and work together with associations to create a revolving funds which are institution-based, where we
We can't hear Christabel.
Hi, Augustine.
Social institution. Yes.
Yes, the line has been breaking, but at least we've had some of the key points that you have raised, but the line keeps on breaking. So I'll just summarize some of the things I think that I was able to pick up in terms of what you have raised, and also trying to summarize some of the key issues raised in the whole of the session. Firstly, I think a number of key things that we need to take forward as institutions and how we can actually work together. I think there's need for a joint response in terms of how we can act together and assist small-scale cross-border traders within the region. You know, I think we've talked about one key thing is about data and knowing how many cross-border traders and being able to present that information to policymakers and institutions, and also at a regional level, how cross-border traders can be assisted, but also it's raising the challenges that they're experiencing in relation to finance. Even if the borders were open now, most of the traders don't have the finances to recapitalize their businesses. So right now they need financial assistance in that regard. The other aspect is really about the awareness and the information, the education around the pandemic, and how do we begin to provide that information, and what channels do we use which involves less contact with the traders. But we've also heard how countries are also moving towards using digital systems. You know, how do we begin to prepare the traders for the paperless systems at the border posts? And how do we get that updated information that once the borders are open, they can't carry receipts, maybe they would have to scan them and all those aspects. Then in that regard, how do the associations begin to prepare? So it's the access to new technology and access to technology that would assist them to actually do the work. So there is really need for a lot of resource mobilization to support cross-border traders. I think there have been good comments that have been coming in that we will all put together. And I think this is just a starting point for us to actually engage on this issue and map out a plan of how we can work together as different institutions to support small-scale cross-border traders. And I also like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers. And
sorry, before you close, I got a burning one, Christabel.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The burning one that I would want to flag out is informality. The informality baggage around the cross-border will mitigate against the cross-border trader getting any assistance. So we should now begin to deal with the issue of informality, the issue of institutionalizing, the issue of having organized groups.
Augustine?
That's the issue of informality and requiring associations to rise to that occasion so that we are now beginning to provide service to deal with that issue. That's the only point that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Augustine, for that. We will actually do some notes in terms of what you've actually shared with also the other speakers, which we'll also be able to share with the participants of this session and how we take those actions forward.
Thank you.
Yes. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the speakers. This has really been great. I've actually really enjoyed facilitating this. Thank you so much, Talkmore and Jacob and Regina. Thank you so much for taking time to be part of this discussion. And the Southern Africa Trust will continue to have these society talks. Please do join us next week for another session, which will look at a different area. So thank you so much.